Hello, I sound like a British person, and between the sound of my voice and these pictures of Sir Kenneth Clark, you should definitely look at this documentary as much more historically accurate than you did before. It probably reminds you of the documentaries you saw in high school, and therefore adds credence to the validity of the events we are going to discuss. Any complaints about the bad part of my accent should be addressed to the Montesanto Corporation, P.O. Box behind the hot water pipe, left-hand side. So, welcome to a documentary series about great wars. Wars that have been fought for good reasons and wars that have been fought for special effect reasons. There have been some wars that have been fought over televisions and others for control of the planet Eternia. The last is the subject of this documentary series, where we will be going through many of the great battles that were fought on the plains of Eternia for different reasons. The first, the Great Wars. The Great Wars of Eternia were first brought up in an original mini-comic published in 1982 by the corporation in the United States called Mattel. During this course of events, the mini-comic, which was drawn by Akai and written by Donald Glut, mentioned the Great Wars in a passing line. For many decades, this was the only known reference to this event that helped shape the planet of Eternia into the giant blue sphere of animation it is known today. But before the Great Wars, before the time when Eternia looked like this giant map that was shipped out to subscribers, there was civilizations that were long surpassed the amazing technological and, shall we say, intellectual supremacy of Eternia. What happened to these lost civilizations, and how did the Great Wars affect them? Long before Castle Grayskull, Snake Mountain, or any of the other places that we know from our playroom, there was a momentary time in Eternia where barbarians ruled the planet. Giant creatures of unknown shape and size that looked exactly like dinosaurs from the planet Earth roamed the fields and were hunted by barbarian warriors for food and sport. When they couldn't find dinosaurs, of course, they could also find tigers, because tigers are everywhere, especially in Africa. Now, on this land called Preternia, which is the way the planet looked well before the spell of separation adjusted the continents, there were wars between the different races for control of their environment, for control of their land, for resources, for control of things that they could use to become masters of the universe. Of course, all of this changed one day when a large spaceship arrived from unknown regions and decided to park itself on Eternia. Now the spaceship eventually became lodged inside the planet, buried deep within the rocky core near the gummy center. This planet was now introduced to two things. The first was the Gars. They were the ones on the spaceship, a blue-skinned race from a faraway planet. The second was their new homeland on Eternia called Onwat Gar. What was different about this homeland from the rest of Eternia was that they had brought great amounts of what would be called technology to Eternia, a planet that was otherwise very barbaric in nature and reminded many of paintings done in the 1960s and 1970s by Frank Frazetta. Now, the barbarians that lived on this planet, of course, saw this technology as something new and shiny and fun, and they shunned the Gaul race, feeling that they did not deserve this technology. It should be shared with everyone on the planet. But, of course, the Gaul, being who they were, wanted to keep the technology for themselves, leading to the ostracization of the species and often the, shall we say, ridicule and persecution of them. Now this was changed when a great warrior came and brought an even greater weapon with him. It was the Sword of He, wielded by the cosmic warrior Hero. Now, along with the sword, he also unfortunately brought a techno-organic virus, which is very similar to the one from the X-Men comics in the 1990s. If it was ripped off from this, it is not conclusive. But, despite where it came from, when Hero was cured from this virus in a mystic pool, the virus was absorbed by the planet, and it began to affect plants and animals and graft techno-organic parts on these otherwise regular type animals. Well, now the barbarian cultures of Eternia had technology of their own, which could rival the technology brought by the Gar race. And what do you think happened next? Well, the Gar felt that they needed to defend themselves, because with technology in the hands of those who was already oppressing them, they knew that steps needed to be taken. So, what they did, if they felt their enemies were going to embrace technology, they would embrace the sword and shield of the barbarian nations, grafting themselves with technology, armed now with giant axes and swords and the fighting techniques of the barbarian races. The Gar set forth to protect themselves and engage in a giant conflict, known now as the Great Wars. These wars decimated the entire planet, destroying not only people, plants, animals, and fungus, but also many cultures, many great buildings. Eventually, Hero, using his magical powers as a great wizard warrior, was able to end the giant conflict with a giant whirlwind spell which separated the armies. But it left its mark, destroying many civilizations, cities, amphitheaters, and post offices. While you could no longer go back to the way things were, the ruins would still remain. Eventually, Hero himself gave his life in another conflict called the Ultimate Battleground. During this battle, giving up his life for the newly kinged King Grayskull, a heroic leader of the barbarian tribes, Hero passed his sword and influenced the king to build a great fortress, a fortress of, shall we say, mystery and power that could be a symbol between the barbarian tribes and the Gar people. Well, despite their best efforts, prejudice still prevailed, and the ongoing effect and the long-term effect of the Great Wars was a prejudice against the Gar people for bringing technology and causing the source of the war against the original barbarian tribes. This prejudice would spread for generations, affecting the royal family, causing the Gar warriors to feel like outcasts in their new adopted home planet. While this could be misconstrued as racism, it really is just racism. I hope you've enjoyed this first introduction to the Great Wars of Eternia, using this picture of Sir Kenneth Clark. I hope that it makes you think that this documentary has some real gravitas to it. On our next episode, we will look at the Ultimate Battleground and how it affected future generations. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to this channel, give it a like, because that helps YouTube with their algorithm, you see. It's all about the algorithm. The algorithm!